you do these simple things, you too could be a millionaire investing in real estate. All right, a simple man, no, just kidding, I would not do that. But I had to give you the letter just for effects and kind of funny at the end of the day. So we've called it the Simple Man Millionaire Plan. And I got to tell you what, I'm really excited to share this with you. I've shared this with a lot of people in my inner circle, but never in this capacity. And so let me set the stage for you. You're going to love the breakdown here as I get into the meat and potatoes. So this is in the early 2000s, 2000, 2001, Midwestern city. After a softball game, it's a Thursday night about 8:30, and I had a softball team I sponsored. I had an orange shirt, orange is my favorite color, and it said, go figure, we buy houses, and the phone number. That was the name of the team, 537-7600, never forget it. And sponsored a team, had a lot of my buddies playing, and of course it was really good promotion because a lot of people show up at these softball fields, and especially when you're your early 20s, it's kind of, you know, you're trying to continue with your glory days, hanging on to lost hope, thinking you can still play and not wake up the next day sore. Boy, I've learned that lesson the hard way many times. So Thursday night, we won the game. We're in the Midwestern town in Ohio, and we're sitting at a bar, my buddies and I, after a softball game, and we're having a beer, talking about the victory and really talking about life and kind of the next steps. Early 20s, everybody's kind of getting into the next phase of life, having to actually be a grown-up. And a good buddy of mine from high school, his name's Brian, always aspired to be a teacher and a coach. That was kind of his world. Loved kids, loved coaching, played sports, had a sports family, and always wanted to be a teacher. And so that was what he was already doing. He already had a great job at a great school, was already in the coaching world. But Brian wanted to do things more so than a teacher's salary would allow him to do. So we're in this bar Thursday night, it's kind of smoky, dark, we're having a good time and talking about how Brian, who is doing what he loves every day, he's teaching high school, coaching high school sports, fulfilling and living his passion, he just didn't like the paycheck. Anybody out there connect with that? You're doing what you love, you're enjoying your passion, you're fulfilling what you feel your purpose in life is, but the pay that goes with it isn't necessarily what you would like it to be or will support maybe bigger dreams that you might have. If that is you or even close to you, this video is for you. So we're in this bar and we get a napkin out, the old napkin deal, and but this is a true story. And I laid out for Brian a plan for him that over really the next 10 to 30 years, he could enact that would allow him to be a millionaire teacher. That's not an oxymoron. A millionaire high school teacher. And thus the plan began. Now, we didn't call it the teacher millionaire plan because this isn't just for teachers. It doesn't need to be just for teachers. It's for anybody who can put a blueprint together and enact the blueprint, follow the blueprint, and ultimately create a life that retires them with quite literally millions of dollars. So on this napkin, what I said to Brian is, Brian, you are a teacher, you have the summers open, you get home, minus sporting and coaching, let's say 3 o'clock. And so, but because you have a little bit of time in your schedule, you'd have the ability to do one deal per year. That means you would buy one investment property per year, and you would have a goal that over the next 10 years, you're going to buy one per year. So the goal is 10 properties in 10 years. That is going to be the goal. So we start with what's the objective, what is the metric we're shooting for, what's the benchmark, where are we setting our sights? One property a year, which means you get to cherry pick, you get to look for the right one, you get to try to identify the right one in a non-rushed fashion, and you're going to be doing that once a year. Well, if you're a teacher and you have summers off, you can do the work yourself in this case because you have a job and you actually have the time, so you can go paint and do some other things that you're capable of and save money. But one a year is the goal. Frankly, you find the right one, may not need a lot of work, you may not have more than a couple weeks worth of work, and your one for the year is done. I want you to do this every year for the next 10 years. The average price I want you to target is $100,000. Now, where do you live? That number may be too low. If you live in LA or San Francisco, that property, $100,000, they may not even exist. You can't buy a shack in San Francisco for less than $1 million, it seems. But in most places around the country, $100,000 is a good benchmark. Buys you a decent investment property. It doesn't break the bank. But guess what? You can play with the metrics I'm going to share with you. You don't have to follow. This is the template I'm going to share you. I use the box. This is the box I'm going to give to you here. Where you live, what you do for a living, and what your goals are. You can change this or vary from the template. This is designed to kind of serve as the blueprint for you to become a millionaire real estate investor, no matter what you do for a living, and using time as your friend. Time is going to benefit you over the long run. If you start with a 10-year goal where you're going to buy one property per year for the next 10 years at $100,000 each, you technically or will have purchased $1 million worth of real estate today over the next 10 years. Now, there's some very simple metrics that are important that you want to adhere to. Number one, you want to have a cash flow about minimum $200 per month per property, or what's also called per door. In the real estate space, you'll hear people call it per door. And usually they're referring to maybe an apartment complex or a condo complex where you have 18 doors, or a 4 units, a 4-door, but for reference sake, you'll hear people use the word door when they're talking about one particular property. So if it cash flows $200 a month, now you are obviously recognizing a cash flow in exchange for just purchasing the property and keeping it for the long term. So I don't want anybody out there watching thinking, I'm going to have to work for 10 years and maybe 30 years and not make a nickel. It's not what I'm saying. In fact, it's the opposite of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you should have a minimum $200 a month cash flow that could be more like $300, and certainly in the right scenario could be more than that. $200 a month is going to be your base level goal, $100,000 as a benchmark type value of the property. And I learned a long time ago, when you have a good job and you don't have to live on the cash flow of the property, rental properties are great. When you have to live on rental income and somebody else is going to pay you for the rental property and you're taking that income and paying your bills, it can be really tough when you have to pay your bills and your tenant doesn't pay on time, or whatever the variation may be. Now, listen, landlording is not hard. I'm not going to go into a landlording spiel. I have some very simple things we do when we are getting ready to rent a property, and other training videos that we really set the stage with the tenant right up front. You have some stringent late fees and penalties, 5% late at the 5th, 10% late on the 10th, 15% late on the 15th. Those are pretty harsh penalties. Those usually get people to pay, but you set the stage with the tenant up front. You let them know this is business. This isn't something that you take lightly. You charge late fees. You expect rent on time. You expect them to take good care of the home, and ultimately in exchange for that, it's a good relationship. Anything outside of that's probably not. If you're remote, and some of our students who are now affiliates invest in other cities, you will hire a property manager, and yes, that will cut into your cash flow. However, sometimes it is worth it to eliminate the need to be a landlord. But just be clear, it's not something you should be worried about or something that is overly difficult, being a landlord. So get that in your head right off the bat. Property managers are also available for you or to you to do some of the landlording should you choose not to. Don't live on the cash. Build up a reserve. If you view these properties as savings, every time you don't take that cash flow, every time you put it in an account and build that account up, every time you have to do a capital improvement to the home, which hopefully isn't often and shouldn't be often if you maintain them, it's like saving money. Look at it like that. Now, friends, family that have properties now and they're getting ready to move or go buy another home, I tell every one of them every time, don't sell the property. You're going to be thanking me in 20 years when you owe barely anything and it's worth a lot more. It's the same thing here. Don't live on the cash flow. You'll be very happy down the road that you built up an account for reserves. If there's ever a vacancy or a tenant doesn't pay, you have a cushion already built up over the course of the time that they're there. So, $100,000 property price point is an easy target. Again, you can shift that depending on where you live. Look, these are just some metrics that I think you should know. 4% is really the average annual appreciation really over the past 100 years, a give or take. But they've been tracking real estate appreciation. It's never linear. It's always, there's some dips, but over the long term, you're averaging about 4% on appreciation. Now, post-COVID and during COVID times, things went crazy, but at the end of the day, that is something that's consistent, and you get about a 3% annual rent increase. So guess what? Over 10 years, you're almost doubling the value of the property. Maybe not the rent per se, but these numbers are today's numbers. And so something that's also really important here that I want to tie down is the 30, okay? It's 10, 10, 30. 10 properties, 10 years, one a year, and it's a 30-year amortization. This is a really, really important component of the teacher plan, something that I learned the hard way, and something that I was taught through that process of learning it the hard way from a very, very successful commercial developer who shared with me a life lesson that was really invaluable. And this was actually right around 2005, 2006, and where I was living at the time, things were already going downhill as far as values and market conditions. And this commercial developer, who was a mentor of mine, was worth probably 30 million bucks on paper, which means he had a lot of properties that showed a lot of equity on paper, but he was cash poor and frankly going broke, having trouble paying the overhead and frankly the payments on the properties that had given him this $30 million in equity. And what he told me was something I'll never forget. We put it in our trainings, we say it often. He said, "Scott, equity will not buy you groceries. Equity won't pay your bills." So having equity in properties is great. You want to look at someone's personal financial statement, it shows that they've got, all these properties, all these assets, and they owe a lot less, they got all this equity. But guess what? If you don't have a nickel to your name or you don't have cash flow, the equity doesn't really matter. Why am I telling you this, aside from the fact it's a great life lesson? They offer, they being banks, other terms than 30 years. You can get 20-year loans. You can get 15-year loans. In fact, you'd think banks would be excited to give you those types of loans, and to the right borrowers, they are. It's a shorter payback time. It's a higher monthly payment. And if you say, look, I'm aggressive and I want to get all these properties, I love the 10 over 10 years, but I'm not putting them on 30, I'm going to go and I'm going to put on 15-year amortizations. Which means if I buy a house today in year 1, in year 16, after 15 years, it's free and clear. I guess technically after 15 years, it's free and clear. And if I buy a house next year and I put on a 15-year full pay amortization table, in year 16, it becomes free and clear. And if I buy a house in 3 years and I put on a 15-year full pay amortization table, in year 17 and year 18 and so on and so forth, every year something becomes free and clear. That's beautiful. Here's the problem with that. Life has rainy days. We all know that. And if you ever find yourself in a rainy day, you don't want to have the obligation of that higher payment because you chose to amortize the loan over 15 years versus 30. Simple math. If you have 30 years to pay a house off or 15 years to pay a house off, which do you think has a higher payment? The 15 years. You're paying it off in half the time. So of course you're going to have a higher payment on a shorter amortization table. What I learned in 2006 from this mentor of mine is you get as much time on the loan as you can, but have the fiscal discipline when you are able to take extra cash flow and then pay down on the mortgage. So if you have a 30-year loan and you can make extra $500 a month on top of your mortgage payment when things are going really good, if something happens in your personal life or with the property or the tenant, you don't have to, and you can't pay that extra $500 that month, so what? You don't jeopardize losing the property or somehow falling behind in your payments. So the key here is really important is to amortize it on a 30-year loan or go to get a 30-year loan from a bank, and banks will be happy to lend that to you for the right investment properties, and have the discipline to try and pay it off earlier than 30 years. Take the extra cash flow and try to pay it down. Now let's play with some numbers here because you can pay it down a lot quicker, but even in a worst case scenario, if you didn't, year 31, your first house becomes free and clear. And let me give you something that is a scary statistic to me, When I had this conversation in 2000, 2001, that was 21 years ago, give or take, as of the filming of this video. Makes me feel really old, by the way. 21 years ago. If he were to do this 30-year plan at that time, by the way, he started about a year after. Brian, my friend in the bar on that Thursday night in Ohio, he's already 2/3 of the way in of paying these things down. Guys, best time to plant a tree, 30 years ago. When's the next best time to plant a tree? Right now. Right now. I hate to say it because it makes me feel old, but time flies. And if you never worked to amortize and pay these properties off early, and you just waited for 30 years, guess what? Your cash flowing $200 a month today, that cash flow is going to be going up every year. So is the value of the home, and you're going to owe less on it every year. If you never worked to pay off the properties early, you are going to be a happy camper when you go to retire. And by the way, this is only for 10 years. At year 10, and I didn't put this up here, you're going to stop and reassess. You've got now 10 properties that are worth $1 million on their face value. By the way, the one that you paid $100 grand for in 10 years is probably worth $200 grand or some number a lot more than 100. So now you have a 7-figure worth of properties, 7 figures worth of properties, I should say, that you now own, control, rent out, cash flow. Now you have options. Let's see where you are in year 10. You may want to keep going. You want to maybe make this 30 times 30 times 30, right? 30 properties, one a year, 30 years and 30-year AM. You can play with this. This is the template, but you have options, and that really is a beautiful thing. And by the way, if you have $200 a month in positive cash flow, and you have 10 properties, that's $24,000 a year. It's $2,400 a year positive cash flow. You have 10 properties, that's $24,000 a year in positive cash flow. If you took 10 or 15 of that and started working on paying down property debt because you're disciplined and not living on it, next thing you know, you're creating more equity and you have options now. If something happens, you have properties that have a bunch of equity. You can always borrow against them. You can sell one if you needed to raise money. You have cash flow. You're building a big reserve. Listen, I could go down the plethora of options, the smorgasbord of options you have, but the best part is you have options because you sucked it up over the last 10 years and you made it happen. Now, there are other parts of this that I want to share, but you've gotten the meat and potatoes. By the way, in year whatever, that rent that was $1,000 a month now is now $2,000 a month, right? That property that was worth $100 when you bought it, now free and clear is worth $220, maybe more. We're grabbing these and kind of surmising as to what we think your rents increased and the values would be over a 10, 20, 30-year period. We've looked back to historical data over the past 100 years. We just know you're going to have properties worth a lot more in 10, 20, 30 years than they are today, even with a non-linear graph going up. Your rents are going to historically go up over the next 30 years, which means these numbers are the starting point. Even if there's a dip in the market over the next 30 years, these are only going to increase. These are only going to increase. So if you took nothing more from whatever training that you've watched, wherever you're watching this, and you could take the crux, the blueprint, the skeleton of this plan and say to yourself, this is a very realistic goal, very achievable goal. Now, you've got to get your ducks in a row. Yes, you've got to get your funding lined up. Yes, you have to start knowing where to look for properties. Yes, you have to have the know-how where to find them and how to make offers. And ultimately, if you're going to buy some properties that need some work, do you have the capabilities of doing them? Do you have people that can do them? Can you oversee them? There are some things you have to figure out. If this was easy, everybody and their brother would do it. So it's those that take the effort and make the effort to make it work that are the ones that ultimately have the benefits of this in the course of time or over the course of time. It reminds me of a saying that I love to say, and I've said many times for our trainings, if you will do today what most people won't, if you will do today what most people will not do, you'll be able to tomorrow do what most people cannot do because they don't have the financial means or the financial wherewithal because they didn't do what they needed to do in the early days. If you're 25 years old, we talked about this right before the filming, and you did this plan, 25 years old and you did this plan, by age 35, you would have 10 rental properties that are worth well in excess of $1 million and maybe a lot more. How many 25 or how many 35-year-olds do you know that have over $1 million in rental properties in their portfolio? Probably not a lot, right? I don't know a lot, and I'm in the business. If you're 35, here you are 10 years, 45. It doesn't matter when you start. You have a 10-year term to accumulate some really, really good investment capital, investment properties, some great cash flow, and some long-term wealth. So this is the plan, which was really the teacher plan. I had the lighter singing Simple Man up front because it really is a Simple Man Millionaire plan. I get excited about it because this simple format can create millionaires investing in real estate without having to be some guru or expert or know all these strategies. All you have to do is know how to buy a rental property and manage it and hold on to it and discipline yourself to do it. You do these simple things, you too could be a millionaire investing in real estate. Time is your friend. If this doesn't excite you, I don't know what does. It excites me. You want to get in real estate, this is a great plan. So hope you got some value. If you have questions, there's ways to get a hold of us. We'd love to work with you in more ways than just watching this video. If you want to implement this, we have some additional material we can share with you. Hope you got some value out of the Simple Man Millionaire plan.